Dr. Mike, welcome back.
Half a day?
Yes, it's 2016. I had mentioned that it was the last time you're on the show, and I'm sure you've been very busy. And I believe the last show we talked about self-determination a lot, really held on to that subject. In the last year and a half, how have you seen short-term changes as far as the movement forward?
Oh, well, first of all,
wow,
thank you for having
question.
me back.
Yeah,
thank you for having me back. And by the way, it's way more high tech and in depth in here.
Thank you.
It's so congratulations.
I think it's the lighting.
The lighting helps, but also all the cameras and stuff too help. But in terms of self-determination, I think there's a lot of different ways I talk about sort of the progress, the changing of the consciousness of the people on the island. And so, and a lot of times it's connected to my personal experience. So, for example, the last month they had a debate on, or it was more of a forum on political status at UOG, the One Guam.
It seems like the first of its kind too, right?
It was.
As far as
at that size, yes.
Right.
With all the candidates, oh, absolutely. And so, in some ways, that was historic. But one thing stuck out at me that was really historic was, as it was ending and people were leaving, an older Chamorro woman who's my auntie, she came up to me and she said, your grandma would be so proud of what you're doing. And then she, and then we talked, because my grandma passed away about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And so and then she left. And so I said to the people who were with me, I was like, like 10 years ago, I had my older relatives come up to me and say, you're embarrassing the family.
Really?
Or because you're speaking out on this, or because of what you're saying, or you're an activist.
Is it because culturally it was sort of taboo to speak up or speak out? You're considered radical, right? I think the only one in past times that anybody can really think of was Angel Santos, right?
Yeah, and I don't think I'm even as radical as Angel Santos, but it's
just the concept, right? The thought.
No, but you're absolutely right that even when Angel Santos first started, a lot of people didn't like his approach, didn't like what he was saying, but he kept fighting, he kept pushing, and then after he died, suddenly a lot of people were willing to take up what he had fought for and to think about what he fought for with a more open mind.
Right.
And so that's why it's always there's a constant battle to open up minds, to change consciousness, and if you keep at it, then and you watch, you'll see the changes happen. And so even just in my life, going from the fact that I used to have old Chamorros angry at me all the time. Because of
Can you just slide the mic just slightly in front of it? It's super flexible. You can just move it. Yeah. Just move it to where you're like talking on the side. Yeah.
Oh, where, like that?
Yeah. Not the front, but there you go.
Oh, like that.
Yeah. See, now you can like really hear yourself. Here, but you can sort of adjust it. There you go. Yep.
There, like that. That's good.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
And so to go for when I first started talking about these issues, like 15, 16 years ago, to then today, and you can see a big change. And other people that I've spoken to, and one of the main people who kind of clarified this for me is Robert Underwood.
Okay.
Because Robert Underwood said, when he was young, when he was like a high school student on Guam, he said maybe he might have taken on a project where he would have talked about independence for Guam, but as just a school project, never really thinking about it, and he couldn't really think of anybody his age who would have thought about that. But he said now, as the head of
back maybe in
was in the 60s,
right?
And so, looking back, he says now that he's like the president of the University of Guam, he has young people come up to him all the time asking these questions.
Right.
He has young people approach him who push him and challenge him and who want something more for their island. And it's really nice. If you think about it, it is a changing of our culture, but it's a changing of our culture in a good way.
Yeah.
Where we used to think, can't ask questions, can't ask for more. You got to be thankful for whatever you get. But now it's kind of like, no, if you're not getting what you deserve, if you're not getting enough, then you should you should do something.
Yeah, I always credit it to social media, you know, just the fact that you can put your opinion online and it can be on the internet. And then also the fact now Chamorros all over the world, or people have ties to Guam all over the world, are now connected to Guam. And so now that feeling of isolation, man, I was just telling someone this last night. I was like, I felt like Guam was isolated all the way up until like maybe the early 2000s, in a sense that we were still getting news late. TV was 1 week late, right? They'll record the TV and they'll call it live TV, and then it's not really live, right?
Oh yeah, I remember that. But you're right that it's a good reminder that the world has changed, and if we don't change with it, then we're gonna get left behind.
Right.
See that, and that's, I always tell people, and the thing is that I think your average person now, even non-Chamorros, they can feel it, because they feel like, you know, when you look at what's happening around us in Asia, there's all these countries that are taking bigger roles in global affairs, and we don't have a direct relationship with them. You look at Palau, you look at the other islands around us, they have direct relationships with those countries. They don't just get the leftovers, the handouts that we get from the United States. And you think about how we're so perfectly positioned, how so many things come through here, heading from east to west, including threats from Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, although now they're best friends. So they're a new metaphor for international high school, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. But you look at that situation and it's kind of like, are we being left behind?
Right.
The way that in the 70s, when the other islands around us worked on their political status, they got to be decolonized, become commonwealths, you know, the Federated States, Palau, and so on. Are we being left out again?
Right. It's almost as if we're watching everyone progress, and we're still handcuffed to the Organic Act and what everything just was laid out for us when we became a territory, right? Quote unquote.
No, it's very true. You look at Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a perfect example how they got hit, their economy got hit hard.
Right.
Their debt hit them hard, and they couldn't really do anything about it because they're trapped in this situation where the United States Congress controls their basic laws. They couldn't even file for bankruptcy.
Right. They couldn't
it's
also get foreign help, right?
Yeah. When they had their hurricanes, they were limited in getting foreign help because of the Jones
Act, right?
Because they wouldn't really exempt them from the Jones Act. They just gave a limited, small exemption. But you can see it. The recovery lasted it's still going on right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a total economic handcuff. I think John McCain is the only one that's been fighting for the repeal of the Jones Act, saying it's since the 90s too. I freaked out. And it's personal interest. That's what he calls it. It's like it's just a law that it's for the self-interest of people who are involved with making the money off of that.
It's very true, and that's why whatever future you want for Guam, you want to have a real say.
Okay.
So that's why I always tell people, even though I'm for one option, if you're for another option, just like understand it and then really want it and understand what it is. So if you're for statehood, you know, that's great. It would mean that you would have a say. It would mean that you'd have a meaningful form of participation in the United States, not like you have now.
Yeah.
But if you want, but staying the way we are now, we're gonna miss all of this. The world is gonna change around us, and we're gonna just be stuck. And we can see that in a certain way how the Japanese tourist market is shrinking, and that was always our stable, reliable tourism demo was the Japanese tourist, but it's shrinking because the Japanese are realizing, you know, they don't like threats from North Korea. Guam is a military facility for them. And then also they can just go to the United States if they want to go.
And it's probably like less than half the price.
Yeah, you could fly all the way across the Pacific for like the same amount as it costs to go to Guam nowadays.
Yeah.
And so you look, and now you think about the future. Well, we need to think about how we can totally revamp our tourism industry in order to get new markets and keep them. And
but does it have to stay the top market?
Does Japan have to?
Does tourism have to stay that top market as far as economy for Guam?
Oh no, you could definitely shift it up too, but for small islands like Guam, tourism is always one of the better ones because it doesn't in terms of the environment, doesn't cause a lot of damage to the environment, compared to mining and stuff like that, or extraction of resources. It's one which can also revitalize the culture and support the local community if you do it right. It's also one that increases your presence and your visibility in your region and in the world, because if people have a connection there because they go there, it increases your chances you're going to have good relations with the countries from the people that go there. So that's why, if we were an independent country and we had 1 million Japanese tourists, that would have been great for us, because we would have been able to develop a strong allied relationship with Japan. But as a territory, you can't really do that. You can't really work together in the way that you would want to, not the way that we see other islands around us doing.
Yeah, and I think the biggest worry for a lot of people that I hear talk about it, it's like, someone else is just going to invade us, but it's possible, but like you said, it allows for diplomacy, right? I mean, on the terms of what we want to stand as a country.
It's true. The fear of being invaded is. I mean, I know that a lot of people feel it. I hear it all the time.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily war invasion too. It can be economic invasion, to where, I mean, look at how China's buying out the Pacific Islands.
No, it's true, and the thing is that the United States used to be the one doing that. They used to be putting money into the Pacific, but what we've seen is that the United States doesn't really want to do that anymore. They don't want to be friends with the world anymore. They feel like you should just like us because we're the best, not because we help you out. And so it's really because the United States is pulling back that China now says, well, if you're going to leave these islands alone, then we're going to develop relationships with them.
Right. It's sort of what's kind of happening to Saipan.
Oh, yes. I mean, in a way, the islands in the Pacific can benefit from this, because the Chinese can invest in ways the United States doesn't. Basically the Chinese, if you get a private industry, some rich Chinese guy who comes over and he represents the power of the government. Like, he will probably be backed by the government. Where if he decides to invest, then actually it's sort of, there's a diplomatic, political component to it too. So it's not just like if a U.S. billionaire comes over here and says, I'm going to do this, the U.S. government may not support him, or it may not be funneling him money, may not be doing anything. But with the Chinese, their investments are connected to their political interests. They work a lot more strategically in that way. And so, but it's good for the countries in the region, because the United States has slowly been giving less and less money to the islands. And it's giving less money to Guam as well. And so you look at that and you think, well, if you want to keep a good relationship with the United States, but they're giving you less and less, you could always try to make them jealous. You could always, pull out the Etgu card and basically say, who's looking really nice lately, Uncle Sam? China.
Right.
Atan, he's got a new car. He's looking really fine over there, China. Woo! Yeah, how come you don't work out like that, Uncle Sam? You're so flabby and fat. You're so obese. Look at that. He's slim. He's mean. He's trim. And then basically you have a decision to make. Do you want to really pursue that relationship with China?
Right.
Or will the United States come back to the table and basically say, all right, we're going to help you out because we want to maintain our close relationship to you?
And is this what you're kind of saying as a territory, something that can be done, or it's something that can only be done as a country?
Now, as a territory, you're limited. You can't really do those things.
Like negotiate at the table, right?
You can't really negotiate. So that's why, and then, one reason why the Chinese, they tentatively are trying to invest in Guam, but not in the same way as Saipan. But because there's a stronger U.S. presence here than there is in the other places, stronger U.S. military interests, and then stronger just sense of American loyalty or connection. But yeah, we don't really have that. We don't just have that ability to basically look at China and say, you know what, we want to develop a strong tourist relationship with you. Because some of the other islands basically are getting, you look at Palau is getting too many Chinese tourists. And so they're actually trying to negotiate and scale it back so they can focus on EU tourism, European Union tourism,
It's
which brings in more money.
Whoa, 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 it's more than we bargained for. Like,
Yeah.
did you forget there's a billion people with
No. And that's why, the thing is, that's why I always tell people, if you want to, we could never survive as an independent country. It's like, well, actually, no, you could. If you became, and if you
But how do
really
you-
wanted to, if you became one of China's even mid-level, favored tourism destinations.
But how do
that
you
would-
protect the self-interest of the company? I mean, of the country then, of Guam. Say we have Chinese investors hypothetically coming in and start buying stuff, and, how do you turn it to where we're not losing stuff because people are selling off all their stuff because
And so,
the land for example, right?
So, for example, that's one thing that we cannot do in a territory, because in the other islands, for example, if you look at the CNMI, the Chinese can't just go in there and buy land.
I think they lease it for like
They have to
99
lease
years
it.
or something like that, right?
And it's like that in most of the islands in Micronesia. Is a foreign company can't buy land, they can't own the land, they can't take it. So in that provides one layer of protection, so that the locals always have to receive something from it when you come in. You can't do that in Guam.
What's preventing that here on Guam though?
No, you can't. You can't pass a law saying that only locals could own something, or
Because it's, I guess I'm not understanding.
if the U.S. passed a law
Yeah.
saying that foreign nationals couldn't own things in the United States,
Understood. Okay.
then you could limit it. But in Guam,
Right.
So for example, it's
For some reason, I was thinking. So even though they made a Guam law, the federal law will still supersede what
You-
the Guam law.
so actually, yeah. If you did create a law which was aimed at like pushing out foreign investors, somebody could basically sue you and say and claim something.
But then you think about it, then it's. I mean, we want people to invest in the place, right? Sort of bring money here, bring economy here,
Yeah.
but to prevent people, I guess, yeah.
There's always trade-offs. That's
yeah,
the thing.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. If you're interconnected, if you're working with other people, you're always going to have to give something up. And so the question now, but for me, you want to be at that place where you even get to play that game. Because right now, Chamorros and others on Guam, you got to give up a lot of stuff, but you're not really in the game. So military increases, well, no one ever sat down and asked anyone on Guam what they thought about that, or what it was going to be like. Changes in the U.S. economy, we get less, or the government, we get less for food stamps. Well, no one came to Guam and asked, we're going to give you this much less. Is that okay? No one ever did anything like that. So the way we are now isn't great because we're not part of the conversation about all of these things that affect us. If you're an independent country, you have at least more of a say. If you're a state, you get representation.
Right.
You get your senators, you get your congresspeople to participate in those discussions, and they can try to protect your interests. You don't get that as a territory. So that's why,
Or maybe not even as a free association, right?
well, as free association, you would have most of the rights of an independent country. Free association is a weird category.
Yeah, I know that's how the Philippines kind of took their steps to getting independence, right? After they were acquired, they became a free association to the United States, I think after World War I or something like that. And I think, by 1936, they were an independent country, or that's when the clock started?
Oh, so that's when the clock started on their Commonwealth.
Right.
So they were in that transition phase for about 10 years. And then after World War II ended, that's when they became independent. And so it was, in a way, they got cheated, because the 10 years were supposed to be for them to get ready to become independent.
Write a constitution.
And the Japanese invaded and occupied them for years. And so it kind of threw off their growth and their timing in a certain way. But yes, the thing is, you want to be a part of that. It's really, really amazing to me, because your average person in the United States is more likely to share some random video about Jellyfish Lake in Palau than they are about something about Guam.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got other islands in the Pacific that capture the imagination, that are interesting and fascinating and exciting to people in the United States, people in Europe, people elsewhere. We don't have that in Guam.
How do you mean? How do you mean exactly?
Oh, so for example, like I think of it, for example, in terms of the tourism industry.
Okay.
Like the types of tourists that Guam gets, we get a lot of these Asian tourists. We don't get tourists from the United States. We get very few tourists from Europe. We do get a small number of tourists from Russia. Why is it that we don't get tourists from the United States or from the EU? Because those tend to be the types of tourists that you want.
No,
especially
$2,000 easily. Yeah.
Now, why is it that in Micronesia, they are targeting and doing decently well at getting European Union tourists to go there? And so, for example, if you go there, you'll find a lot of people who come from Europe, and it's because, they have been the imagination has been captured, so they're willing to go across the world and spend a couple months.
Yeah, but I think with the internet and people putting videos up on Guam, you can kind of capture the imagination that way, right?
You can, but if you think about the type of stuff that Guam produces about itself, a lot of it doesn't make it an interesting place to visit. It makes it clear that we are America in the Pacific.
Interesting.
And if you think about that, that's one reason why we're losing the Japanese market, is because when Trump to the Japanese is somebody who is frightening, so they associate Trump yelling at countries or tweeting crazy things, and so they think I guess I don't want to go to Guam because that's America. And then more and more as a military base, as a military facility, and so we're lucky that the South Korean tourists have kind of taken the place of the Japanese, but they're a very different demographic, a very different market.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
and so, and for me, it always comes back to this issue that, I always think of it in terms of the Munya brothers when they made that documentary Talent Town. And so the challenge always is, if you want Guam to kind of be more global, who do you put your money behind? And the truth is, you should put your money behind the creative people. You should put your money behind the filmmakers and the musical artists and the painters. You want to put your money behind them because they're going to be the ones that create the work that makes it so that Guam is hot, not in the might be sense.
Sort of like the person, they're the personality of the place.
Yeah, because we were branded, for the longest time, everybody branded us. Magellan branded us as thieves. We were branded as sort of a military base, a U.S. base in the Pacific.
Savages.
Yeah, and so now with the use of social media, with sort of these moments like this where the world turns to Guam because of North Korea or brown tree snakes or whatever else, you got to brand yourself. And that's why I like sort of the idea of pushing for decolonization too, because it creates the impetus for this big moment of rebranding of the island. Like, taking back as best as we can the meaning of ourselves, what we represent ourselves, and for a variety of reasons that will help improve things here.
Yeah. So what are the baby steps that need to be taken? And I always think about that when people are think it's just straight to independence and that's it. I'm sure there's some sort of process that needs to happen, or some things that maybe were set in stone. I mean, you think about the Organic Act, and that thing is 68 years old, hasn't been amended once,
or it's been amended a couple times.
Has it? Okay. Yeah. But hasn't changed much of anything, right?
I mean, it's still basically the same. The small changes like the governor, elected governor, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. When I hear people talking about amending the Organic Act to change this or that, one of the first steps we should take is to basically stay away from the Organic Act and start a new process of getting ourselves to a new status and a new founding document.
Yeah, has anybody ever even tried writing a constitution? Has that ever been attempted here, at least within the government of Guam?
And so there were two attempts, two constitutional conventions.
Wow.
One of them was the convention was a while ago in the 60s, and it was the people who convened it were very confused because of Guam's status. When you create a constitution, what does it mean? Because as a state, you create a constitution and it has meaning and it has power. As a territory, if you create a constitution, you have to submit it to the U.S. Congress, and they can change your constitution because you're a territory. They're the ones who decide what you can and can't do.
Right.
And so that first convention, they came out suggesting changes to the Organic Act because they weren't sure they had the authority to even create a constitution. And then 10 years into the future, there was a second constitutional convention, and Carl Gutierrez, the former governor and perennial gubernatorial candidate, he was the president of that convention. And they did produce something, but it was defeated. The voters here defeated it because there was a movement of people, and this is where personalities like Robert Underwood, Hope Cristobal, Laura Souder, B.J. Cruz, they come out because they feel you got to pick your political status first before you write your constitution. And so Mauleknyo and Nafotna Carabao Kinui Karata don't, it's better if you put the Carabao first than the cart, not the other way around. And so they convinced enough people to reject the Constitution. And so that's when you then start the 30 years of trying to work with the federal government on creating a new political status, the Commonwealth movement and so on. And it doesn't go anywhere. There's fault on the federal side, on the local side. And now you're kind of in that process again. But one reason why so there's two different ways to think about a constitution. Now, number one, if you follow the way that Congress has set it out, it's not really a constitution. It's just Organic Act 2. Because so the Virgin Islands has had this experience where they've tried 5 times. And it always gets stopped because they will try to put things into their constitution to protect. So one of the most infamous things that they did is that when they were writing their constitution, because the Virgin Islands has this thing where people live there for part of the year, but then they run for local office or they serve in the political parties there. So like the Republican Party in the Virgin Islands may be headed by somebody who doesn't even live in the Virgin Islands.
Right, just a vacation spot, right?
And so they've got a lot of people that live there for a fraction of the year. And then there's people that have lived there all their lives and they consider themselves to be local. And so in the last constitution, they wanted to basically, because they can't define themselves as indigenous and they can't really define themselves as local, so they tried to make all of these restrictions to protect themselves from people that just spend part of the year there.
Right.
So one of the restrictions was that if you wanted to be like the governor, you had to have lived in the Virgin Islands for 20 years. Now, that's a long term of residency.
Yeah.
And the Department of Justice at the time said this is unconstitutional. And every single thing that they put in there to try to protect locals, they struck it out and said, if you want this to be your constitution, get rid of this. This violates U.S. law. This is against the law. This is trying to discriminate against people that aren't from Virgin Islands. Out, 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 out. And so if you take the first path, we would have the same thing. So if you tried to put something in there that said Chamorro Land Trust, the Department of Justice would probably say, out. This is illegal. This violates the Constitution.
Right.
So that's the first process where if you're submitting it, but a constitution is supposed to be the will of your people, what you guys want. This wouldn't be it because it would get torn apart by Congress and the federal government.
And it won't truly be representative, right?
It won't. Now, the other route is if you do create a constitution and then you basically decide, screw the federal government. This is our document now. Now, I can't exactly explain to you what the ramifications would be if that happened. You would there would be some angry judge somewhere.
Yeah.
If the legislature and the governor went ahead, they would probably be called into contempt of court.
Right.
They would probably get thrown in prison, and it would become a contest of will. Because you would say, this is our constitution. You don't have the right to change it. You can't tell us what our founding document should be.
Yeah, there can't be no formal vote of people voting on the Constitution.
Well, there should be, and so that's why if you create so those are the two paths for a constitution. If you do one, but you work with the existing system,
right,
it's not really yours. They're going to change it based on whatever they want.
And then you just go rogue. The other one is
you just go rogue. And then, so for me, the second option is the only way I feel that you could really have a constitution now. But you would have to be prepared to defend it.
Yeah.
You would have to basically say, this is what we want. And it is a strategy.
And you got to have many tuxedos for those court visits.
It is a strategy because, you know, it's funny because I've met with 4 of the 5 candidates that are running for governor just to talk to them about these issues. And so for each of them, I told them, you know, if you want to push ahead on the political status issue, you got to be ready to fight, and you got to be ready to make some noise to get some attention, because right now you're not a priority. Guam is important when they need some place to put Marines. You know, Guam is important when they need a place to refuel Air Force One.
Right.
But for other things, Guam.
Sorry, you can take him out, dude. Take him out of the room, bro.
Oh.
Yeah, he just got lonely. Can you just bring his bed out, dude? Yeah.
But for other things, Guam isn't important. And so I said, if you want real change on the political status issue, then you got to have a strategy of disobedience, where you got to find strategic ways to basically.
But there's got to be a diplomatic way to go about it, right?
No, you can try.
I mean, it may take 100 years, but
no, you can try. But you gotta get their attention. So think about like 1949. At the Think about the Guam Congress walkout.
Uh-huh.
So something
what
like
year
that.
did that happen?
So that was 49.
What is he doing? Hey, he's giving you attention.
He probably smells all the dogs that I stay with.
Yeah, he's cool. He's cool. He'll probably sniff your slippers on the whole time we're here.
But so you look at that, and Chamorros were asking for a change in their political status since before World War II. And even though they died for the United States during World War II, the United States wasn't going to change anything. When they came back after they, kicked out the Japanese, they didn't give Chamorros more rights. They didn't give them any more protections. They didn't give them a role in their government. It wasn't until there was a protest and there was international pressure at the United Nations.
They're sitting in the Guam Congress. They're like, "What the hell are we doing here?"
No,
basically.
That's exactly it, is that the people, because at that time, if you lost your land to the U.S. Navy because they came in, they kicked you off your land and they bulldozed your farm, who were you supposed to tell?
Mm-hmm.
So they would go to the people in the Guam Congress, and they would complain and say, "What are we supposed to do? I've lost my land.
Right.
Like, how am I supposed to survive?" And so the Guam Congress people were really frustrated too, because
how many in Congress at that time? Because it wasn't always 15, right?
Oh, no. This was a totally different format. There was 2 houses in the Congress, and only one of them walked out. And they were all, but the issue is they were elected, but they were advisory. Right. They didn't have any power.
Okay.
And one of the frustrating things for them was actually that they were supposed to be like a Congress. And so one of the things that they were investigating as the Congress was that these U.S. Navy guys that were stationed here would then leave service, and then they would open up businesses on Guam, and then they would get their buddies still in the service to give them contracts and stuff like that. And so all of these sailors suddenly were in charge of utility companies on Guam and in charge of all these businesses. And the Guam Congress wanted to investigate that because Chamorro entrepreneurs were getting shut out and getting screwed over. Mm-hmm. So they subpoenaed somebody to come and testify before them to find out. And the guy told them, "Screw you. You're not a real Congress. I don't have to do anything you say." And so that, combined with the land issues, the land takings, the lack of rights, they eventually decided, we're going to walk out and we're going to refuse to come back unless we get some basic rights. And the media at that time gave it coverage. And they gave it coverage like Guam had rebelled against the United States. Right. Like it was a revolt. One newspaper in the States called it Guam's Boston Tea Party. Even though it wasn't that dramatic. They just walked out of a room.
Went to their car because it was hot outside.
I know. They walked out of the Quonset home.
Just meet me in my car, dude. It's hot out here, dude.
I bet 1 or 2 of them did walk out just because it was hot. Okay, I'm down. Let's go.
Yeah. My back's been sweating for the last 30 minutes.
But I tell the candidates, I say, you can have movement on this issue. One is the local side. You got to try to unite the people, get them educated, get them inspired. The other side, which is harder, is getting the United States to come to the table.
Well, it almost seems like you need 500,000 people to be marching on the steps of Congress, right? I mean, how you see in Hong Kong what happened in Hong Kong, what happened in New York, Argentina, Venezuela, and it almost seems like that's how you sort of get attention, quote unquote, right? But you're never gonna garner that many people, but I guess from the way I look at it is just the way things have been for the last 30 to 50 years. It's nothing's changed, and everybody's okay with it, right? And so where's my thoughts going with this?
No. It's true. That's why I'm happy now that more people seem interested in the issue of political status change.
Right.
And because, if we don't try to change things will get changed without us, without our say. If we don't try to take control of it, then somebody's going to do it for us. And that's why, I always tell people, I'm like, if you don't like the issue of decolonization, I mean, I can understand that because the media doesn't help that much. The educational system doesn't help.
And
that
like
much.
we mentioned the last time you were on the show, it's just the connotation of the word, right?
Yeah.
The sound of the word, it has that negative connotation.
No, so there's nothing wrong with you if you aren't into it. But the problem, though, is that it's changing all the time without you caring about it. And even if you say it's this issue that doesn't affect me, it affects you all the time. I mean, number one issue is that if you like our status now because we get all this money from the United States, we don't have any control over that.
Right.
Like, we're a territory. Whatever we get is unilaterally decided by the U.S. Congress and by federal agencies. And
technically and hypothetically, someone can be having a bad day, right, and just be like, well, we're just going to cut funding.
No, it's very true. Is that, if all it would take is, and I hate to say it because the Republicans in the U.S. Congress tend to be against the territories more. The Democrats are usually more in favor of including the territories, giving them more money. But the Republicans are usually the ones where actually if they could have their way, then they would cut the territories out of a lot of federal programs. And the thing is that if you are a territory, that's how it works, is that the feds can cut you out one election, bring you back in the next election. And then when parties change power again, take you out again, bring you back in. And the thing is, if you're thinking long term, that's not a great position to be in. We have this idea that the federal money is so stable, and it has been for quite a while. But if you look at, it's hard to tell the direction of the United States nowadays.
Yeah, I think a good example is what happened recently, right? That $62 million cut, had to figure out, like, within an emergency time frame, how you gonna run government, right?
No, it's very true. And then before that, there's been cuts in the social services that the feds have been giving. They've been giving less and less. And so if you like food stamps, well, the feds are, especially under Trump, and if the Republicans control Congress, they're going to make sure Guam gets less and less. And it has nothing to do with what we want. If you had a vote here, people would probably want more money for.
But you think about it on the flip side, that's what we want, right? I mean, we want people to be off of welfare and to be wanting to support themselves, because my qualm about welfare is that it's creating generations of people on welfare. It's not sort of like, all right, we'll give you money for 3 months or 6 months, and until you figure it out. But there's people that they'd rather not figure it out. They sort of would just rather hang out at home all the time and just collect the check. And it's a harsh reality, but it seems like you like poke at it, you're like, I want it, but it doesn't seem like it's the right thing, and I feel like it's gonna be like that for the next 20 years until we really figure out what we want, at least as a place, right?
I mean, I think that having a plebiscite, having a vote, can be very important in helping get some guidance on that, because we haven't had a plebiscite since the 80s, and the last plebiscite that we had, it gave a direction. It said Commonwealth is what the majority of the people wanted, and so then they spent about 15 years trying to negotiate Commonwealth with the federal government, and so we kind of need a direction like that again. Is we need to kind of sit down, educate, look at the future, because where we're at now is very different.
But it's not up to government, right, to determine that. It's up to the people who occupy the space.
Oh yeah, no.
Right, and it's, I don't know. I guess when it comes to that thought, it's like there's so many different kinds of people. How do you account for everybody?
In terms of what they want, or
in terms of what we want as a place, because there's people who have called this home for generations already, right? And they may not be Chamorro, or their family came here in the 1800s and stuff like that. So how do you like sort of account for everybody who sort of wants to have that say also?
And so if their family came in the 1800s, then they're legally considered Chamorro, actually. So, because the legal definition of Chamorro is like 10% people who aren't who wouldn't be considered Chamorro normally, but their families were here before the war, and they received and then they received U.S. citizenship through the organic.
As oddly as it sounds, right? Like, oh, by law, you're Chamorro, dude.
So my what's it called? My great grandfather's pari, they called him like Juan Tagalog. He was a Tagalog guy, and they shared a ranch up on the hill in Tutuhan. And his family is considered legally Chamorro because they were a Tagalog family that was here before World War II, and they became U.S. citizens through the Organic Act. And that there was Japanese that happened to, and there was also non-Americans that happened to. And so, but I totally understand what you're saying, and that's why, when...
Sorry if it seems loaded. I mean, no. I mean, it's...
No, I appreciate it, because for the longest time, people thought that this issue of decolonization is just a Chamorro thing.
Yeah, there seems to be a very wide confusion of what everything's all about.
No, and it's not just a Chamorro thing. I mean, so even if the way it works now is that there's a plebiscite that only certain amount of people get to vote in and get to express what they want, the plebiscite is non-binding. The plebiscite only gives a direction. And you have to think about it, that since it's a non-binding symbolic plebiscite, then the symbolism is so important. And so you have to think, it's like, let's say your kids are fighting and one of your kids gets beaten up. And so you want to make that child feel better, so you decide to say, you know what? Because somebody here got hurt, I'm going to let them pick where we eat dinner tonight. So you do that as a symbolic gesture to try to make them feel better because they were hurt. Now, so it's all symbolism, but what is the symbolism if you decide to let all of the children, including the ones who weren't hurt or did the hurting, that you decide to include all of them and let them pick where you eat?
I see the analogy you're running with, or the metaphor, right?
Then the symbolism is gone, because the purpose of it is that you were left out of something. You were hurt in the process. So I'm going to give you this chance now to basically say what you would like to as a symbolic process of healing.
So does it X out? So say the youngest kid gets the vote, right, of where they want to go. Does it X out the other options automatically, or is this something that everyone else has to sort of be like, okay, yeah, well, you guys decided, and we're cool with it?
Well, so if you think about it, the other children can come in and say, I would really like to go. We should go here. Right. Don't you like that place? They can join the conversation.
It's more of a determination if another vote needs to happen.
So whatever comes out from the plebiscite, and if we look at other places, sometimes you have multiple plebiscites. But whatever comes out of it is not necessarily set in stone, but it simply provides a direction. And the thing is that you want everybody to be involved in the educational process. And that was something that the past generation of activists and advocates on this issue that I feel like they didn't do enough about, is that if you have a process in which there's a significant number of people who aren't going to be able to vote in it, then you need to talk to them more. You don't talk to them less. You talk to them more, because they need to understand that they're not being excluded, they're not being kicked off the island, but their role is to support. Their role is to basically say, you know what, the Chamorro people, you guys have been screwed over a lot in the past, and it is my role here because I love this island. It's my home, and I recognize that the Chamorro people are the indigenous people of this island.
Right. Chamorro not by blood, Chamorro by law.
Legal definition.
Right.
And so, I got your back.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you what I think you should do. I'll tell you what I think is best. But I recognize that because I come from the Philippines, we fought for our independence. I come from the United States, they fought for their independence. I came from Palau, we negotiated our independence. I come from Korea, we fought the Japanese to get our independence.
Yeah.
So I recognize that my role here is not to take away your rights. My role here is to share your home with you. And the more you talk to people, the more you can come to that understanding. But in the past, people always felt, no, this is a Chamorro thing. Don't talk to the Filipinos. It's not their thing. But no, they have to be included.
Right.
You got to be part of it.
Man,
because
huge confusion there. Did you guys think that it was just Chamorros by blood?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh.
No,
See? And they're 10 years younger than me.
No, it's a legal definition.
Okay.
And so
yeah, it's just crazy.
it's a legal definition. And so that's why, the whole Davis case thing, it's pretty bullshit, to be very honest, because it's a non-binding vote, first of all. So,
and it's non-discriminatory.
And it is based on time. It is based on
right.
It is a time-based definition. And so it is something which doesn't happen a lot in the United States, but it's a unique case. And I was very upset when the judge who decided the Davis case, who is a Chamorro woman, when she accepted all of these bullshit arguments, which, and anyways, it's hard for us to win in the U.S. legal system in a lot of ways, but it was very disappointing. But the more that we talk about it in these ways, that it's not just a vote, it's a conversation.
Is that something that gets elevated to the UN courts or anything like that?
It can be.
Oh, okay.
It can be.
I don't want to provoke anything. I'm just that's out of curiosity.
No, it can be. You can take it up there and you can try. I mean, Native Hawaiians have gone to the UN courts. Other groups have gone to the UN courts. Sometimes you'll get international support for your movement. With the United States, it's hard. The United States is pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council. I
just saw that. That was today, yeah.
And so it's unfortunate because the United States used to be kind of a leader at the United Nations, and now they're trying to pull out of it and just do their own thing. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But just going back to this conversation, and for anyone listening out there, I mean, this vote on political status, this plebiscite, it's not racist. If somebody tells you it's racist, and this is coming from
you can literally be a black man whose family grew up here before 1950, and you are eligible,
and they became U.S. citizens because of the Organic Act, then you would legally be considered Chamorro.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, though, just it is this conversation about our future, and that's why for me, you gotta talk to the non-Chamorros, those who couldn't vote, and you gotta kind of help them understand, and this is deeper than just this vote, because if you think about it,
the vote is just the surface.
It's just
literally, or maybe the peak of the surface.
But if you think about it, how many people, how many people have made their way to Guam and come here, and then because the red, white, and blue flag flies over the island, they never develop a healthy respect for the Chamorro people. Like, I can tell you that I have met some Filipino people that live on island who think that Chamorros are extinct, who don't think there's any more Chamorros left in the world, who think that Chamorros live in the jungles on the island that are primitive.
Almost like Aborigines.
Yeah. I have met Filipino people who think those things, and it's because they are so disconnected. They think that this is just an extension of the United States, and they don't understand.
Are you just talking about Filipinos who just recently moved to the island?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, but this is it goes further in the past than that. It's just this idea that this is where America's Day begins, and you come here. And so if you're raised in this idea that Guam is just Guam, USA, it's just this Pacific part of the United States, then of course if somebody tells you we need decolonization, you're going to be angry and upset, because they're messing with what you thought was your corner of America. But you never really got a chance to know the people who are here and what they've struggled and what they've been through. And you never asked yourself, is my place here, is it?
Yeah, and I think I want to recall our first conversation you had of you said that there was somebody who was in the military, and they were amazed by the amount of Guam flags that are represented, and you won't find anybody just repping their state flag, right? And it sort of seems like that pride is there already.
Oh yeah.
Of like, okay, well technically we're kind of a country because we believe in ourselves, right?
Oh yeah. We have that pride in ourselves, and it's one of the reasons why things are different now. If you went around talking in the 70s or the 60s about decolonization, Chamorros would have laughed at you. Chamorros would have said, "Oh, that's so stupid. That's so silly," or they would have said, "No, we can't do that.
Go in the house and don't talk about that outside."
Yeah, they would have said. But now, if you talk about it now, you get a lot of different responses. So what is most interesting to me is the fact that, last week? It was just last week. Last week I had a dinner with a man in his mid-80s, a Chamorro man, who was really happy that people are talking about independence. This is I think he's 84, 85-year-old Chamorro guy. And he says basically he told me his whole life story. And one of the things that he was really happy about is because when he was young, he was in the schools before World War II. And he asked a question when they were talking about the president of the United States, saying, "This is our president," Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he asked a question where he was like, but we didn't vote for him. Is he our president? And his teacher told him, "Don't ask those questions. He's our president." And so he was a little bit upset and he asked his friends in the class.
How old was he at the time?
He was 6. He was 6 years old. So he was just starting, or maybe he was 7, excuse me.
Big difference.
So he was just starting. He was just starting in school.
What a mind though, right?
Well, it's kind of an obvious question way, because you're told we vote for the president of the United States, but then in Guam you don't vote for president of the United States, right? Sometimes nowadays kids still ask those questions. He went home and he asked his family about it, and they said the same thing. We don't talk about it. That's not our business, They said Chamorros take care of the ranch. They take care of their family. They don't take care of the government. They don't. Then so there was this idea that Chamorros can't talk about those things. It's not our place to think about those things.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so even after the war, he said when he was then going to high school after the war here on Guam, he said the same thing. The teachers still didn't want to answer those questions. And so when the Organic Act was passed, he was really happy because he said, "Well, we're Americans now. I'm an American citizen." Because he could go to the States, and he got to go to the States to continue his education. And he said that it really struck him hard because he thought the Organic Act, we're Americans. I learned all this stuff about America. I speak English. When he went to the States in the 50s, oh, hell no. He was not an American. He was pushed to the back of the bus. He was pushed away from drinking fountains for whites. He was told repeatedly he can't be served in this restaurant. He was told to enter stores from the back, because the U.S. was still largely segregated in the 50s and in the 60s. It
was white and then whatever color you are, right?
And so when he was sitting down with me and talking to me about all of this stuff, he was just upset because he's like, were people lying to me? Or did they not really know the truth of who we are or what we are? Were they afraid to think about it? But he was just upset because he struggled in his soul over what he was, because he had been taught that he's an American and to be proud to be an American. And then he goes to the States and he's treated like less. And so he says, looking back now, he's happy that it seems like Chamorros are finally willing to talk about those things that they couldn't for the longest time. That now you could have a conversation in your backyard, around your dinner table, sort of at your family ranch. You could bring up this topic and everyone may have an opinion on it. And somebody may be the joker who wants to shut it down and just troll and say stupid shit. Yeah. But for the most part, people want to engage. And if you ask questions, if they don't know the answers, most of them want to know more.
Right. And I think it's the most important part of the evolution of the idea, right?
Oh, very true.
Self-determination or decolonization, or however you say it. Whatever status you believe is the best way is to talk about it with people with opposing views or maybe the same views. And
Oh yeah.
and until I felt like until recently, maybe within the last 10 years also, like you weren't able to really talk to people without being like, nah, dude, I'm offended. You know what?
Yeah.
Fuck this, bro. I'm out of here, bro. But it's more of accepting, like, okay, let me hear open-mindedness, right?
It's very true. And I think part of it is because part of it is because the advocates are different. People are, people come up to me all the time challenging me. People send me angry emails. People say mean things on social media. I just want people to be educated. If you disagree with me, but you know what you're talking about and you're serious about it, then I'll accept it. But I don't want you, but that's why for me, if you want to know why statehood might be good for Guam, I can tell you reasons why statehood might be good for Guam. I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to withhold the information from you. If you want to know that, I'll talk to you about it.
Oh, man.
I'll share your ideas.
It totally reminds me of this guy, older gentleman. When I was going to the U of A, he would come twice a year. Every semester, he would come for a week, and he'll stand out in the mall area. If you know U of A, it's called the mall, and it's just this long grass area for about a mile. And he'll post up, and he'll set up some speakers on the outside, and he'll put on his little microphone, and then they'll talk religion.
Oh.
They'll talk religion, and he'll have all walks of life, scientists, atheists, Catholics, Protestants, Baptists, all these people throwing questions at him. But the thing that made him special in my eyes was that he was allowing for the conversation to be heard, to be talked about, by moderating and saying, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Now, let's work through this. And him and somebody would engage in a conversation, and he's on a microphone, and it's literally people at our university, 50, 100 people just sitting there, just kind of like in awe of just the conversation that this guy is engaging in with people who are challenging his opinion, right? Or his thoughts on certain things. He's not necessarily preaching, and I think that's the biggest throw off for a lot of people who do public speaking. It sounds like preaching. Sounds like you're out there at the sign like, you're gonna go to hell. It's like, it seems like that. That's what it really seems like.
Oh no, that's very true. And after I've been talking to people about this issue for 15, 16 years now, learning from people at first, mainly listening, and now doing more talking, but also still listening to people. And what I find is that a lot of the resistance that people have it's not like serious. It's not strong resistance. It's not like they're strongly against everything. A lot of times it's just because they don't know that much and they haven't been empowered. I mean, that's the thing is, once you kind of talk to them about it, and then once you tell them, what would you like to see for a better Guam? What do you want? Like,
right.
What isn't working? Can you think of a better way of doing it? And people, for the most part, and it's funny because everyone complains about things, but they complain because they're not empowered, because they don't feel like they actually have any say,
like
or
they matter,
any role in what happens.
It doesn't really matter what I
this
say,
or in that. And so once you kind of meet with them and you talk to them and you basically give them the ability to kind of talk about their ideas, it's very inspiring for them. And that's what you want. That's what you really want. And that's why I'm glad that things are changing and that the consciousness is being raised and it's being opened, because it's really, really funny, because when I meet with older Chamorros who are from the post-war leaders generation, it's really, really interesting, because a lot of them are really smart on issues of political status. And a lot of them sort of have what they wanted, have a particular status option that they're in favor of, but they never felt comfortable, even if they were a governor or a senator or a captain of industry. They didn't feel comfortable talking about it because the community didn't seem ready, or they didn't know if they could talk to the people about it. But some now, or over the past, 5 years, when I meet with those types of people, they're all really thankful. Like one person I have to share who who is really sharp on these issues is former Governor Joe Ada.
Okay.
You can talk to him about all of these issues and what it was like when he was negotiating with the federal government over Commonwealth. And for him, he's just so happy because he's kind of like, it's really nice because, sometimes people come up to me now and they ask me this question about political status, or somebody says, could we do this? Could we survive like this? And he's like, boy, people never used to ask me those. People never used to want to talk about those things. And now they want to talk about those things. And it's for him, it's really exciting because I feel like that generation, which kind of built the government of Guam and built a lot of the industries that we have on island today, I feel like they could have gone further. They could have pushed harder, but maybe they didn't know how, or maybe they felt boxed in by sort of territorial status and so on. But now it seems like they're excited about the possibilities for what may come next.
Yeah, I think the first thing that popped into my mind is that we sort of didn't understand what other places were going through, right?
Very true.
I mean, look at Catalonia. They totally just left Spain. Right?
Yeah, and Spain doesn't want to recognize that. Yeah. No, you're very right.
Mm-hmm.
You're very right, because part of the reason that we are changing is because the world is changing and we're becoming more connected. It's part of the globalization of our consciousness too.
Understood. Yeah.
Is that, look at I always love sharing this, and I did check in. Former Governor Felix Camacho said I could share this anecdote, but he shared with me and Victoria Leon Guerrero from Independent Guahan. We met with him once, and he shared an experience about how when he went to a conference in the States, in the federal government, about, I think, reefs, coastal reefs, because he was a governor from a territory, he had to get his own accommodations, he had to get his own transportation, and no one really helped him. No one really helped him in any way. But the presidents of the Pacific Islands around Guam and Micronesia, all of them got transportation. They got their own Escalades. They got accommodations. They got treated, they got sort of diplomatic treatment.
Right. Police escort.
Yeah, because he was from a territory. He didn't get any of those things. And so actually, he said that one of the presidents of the CNMI rolled by him with an Escalade while he was walking to the subway and was like, "Hey, Felix, you want to ride?" And Felix Camacho was like, "Lanya, dude, how did you get that?" And then the president from the Micronesian island was like, "Hey, it's the benefits of independence." So it's important, because now we used to look at the other islands around us as being inferior to us.
Right.
But now we can see that there's some advantages we have. There's some advantages they have. There's some ways that they are ahead of us in terms of where they're at in their political growth, where they're at in terms of making their connections in the region.
Right.
And we haven't been able to get to that point yet. And so that's why when you're talking about how we can see other places, like we used to see these other islands, like Palau, for example, is just, Palau is just, it's just an island, it's more primitive than Guam.
Yeah.
But now you can see it as this island which is making great strides in terms of environmental protection and getting a global brand.
Yeah, and how much of a difference it would have made if the process of Palau becoming independent was on social media.
Oh, right? Yeah. Oh man, that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
But they're already doing a pretty good job now, just in terms of getting that global awareness of their existence, and then getting, a lot of support for their programs, because they see what they have. They have beautiful environment, sort of incredible sort of environmental treasures. And so the thing is, the usual model is, well, just open it up and let a whole bunch of people exploit it and let a whole bunch of people check it out, and then you would probably end up destroying it. But you'd make money along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, they're getting ahead of the game, seeing there's a green trend, and putting out all these environmental initiatives, which makes them more popular and more exciting and more interested. And so the types of tourists that they can get are the higher end tourists from like the EU, who want to go to this environmental treasure of a place.
Right.
And the thing is, you may not get as many of them, but they may spend more than your average sort of Chinese tourists would spend. And so, but that's why learning from other places and seeing and so in some ways Guam It sucks because we were left out when all of these other islands around us were decolonizing. We're sitting across from the United States saying we want this for our future. The United States saying, no, you can't do that, and then negotiating. We didn't get to do that. But we benefit by being later in the pack because we can see what other people did.
What worked, what didn't.
We can see what they tried, maybe try to do it better, try to do it differently, pick and choose what we want. People look at the Philippines and say, well, the Philippines is a poor, unstable country and so on. Well, who's to say that we would end up like the Philippines?
Right.
If there's lessons that we can learn from what the Philippines did or what they're doing now, it is on us to do the research, to get the knowledge, to make the right plans.
Right. How do you think economy can be stabilized, at least? And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but as far as anything, say everything's opened up, right? We can trade with anything. What's a good stabilization of the economy besides tourism?
I mean,
right?
As I said, tourism is one of the better options.
But trade could be, right? Imagine if we're getting bananas from Pohnpei.
No.
Right?
It's
exporting whatever we have here.
No, you're thinking in the right direction, I say, because right now Micronesia is kind of connected under the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because the United States has close or direct relationships with everybody. But that doesn't mean we're really connected. We can kind of work together on certain things. But imagine if the Marianas was unified or Micronesia became more of a union.
Right.
The Micronesian Union.
Yeah, the MU.
The MU. We're so close to the MCU. Each island gets their own superhero.
Right. Which one? Who is Iron Man?
Oh wait, I gotta tell a stupid Chamorro joke. Wait, did you hear about the Chamorro superheroes from Saipan? Well, first there's Superman Glotnya. And then there's Batman Sapit. I didn't come up with those. My students, every semester students have to get Chamorro jokes from their relatives, and every semester somebody tells that joke. It's always a different person. Those jokes are going around.
Batman Sapit.
But we would be in a stronger position.
Right.
So, because when we're thinking about independence, a lot of people think, oh, you're on your own, right? Because they think personally, when you become personally independent, right? You move out, you take care of your own stuff, but you're always connected to others. You're always benefiting from relationships, and it's the same as an independent country. But right now, Guam can't be the leader in the region that Guam could be because we're held back. We're kept out of a lot of conversations that we could be a part of.
Yeah.
Like Guam could be the leader in this. So as all of these other Pacific islands are trying to brand themselves in terms of environmental consciousness, Guam is way behind them, actually. We could be an environmental leader in the Pacific, but we're not.
We can literally hold conventions here for Micronesian islands to debate on these things, on what's most important environmentally, economically, and...
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to just be the tip of the military spear. We could be the tip of other types of spears.
Right.
Tip of the environmental spear, for example. But yeah, so that's why the future, there's a lot of possibilities for the future. But you want to get Guam to a place where it can benefit from them, that it doesn't just get sort of what falls off the table.
Right.
You know, you want to be at the table. Maybe because if you're sitting at the table, maybe you can't get as much of
maybe you're not eating off of a gold plate, but paper plate's good.
You got a shot. If you're sitting at the table, you can call, I want some of that, I want some of that. You can't take everything you want, but it's better than kind of being on the floor and then just collecting what people drop on the floor.
I see.
And Guam has benefited because maybe we're sitting right next to the United States and it drops a lot of shit on the floor. And so we get to gobble it all up. But it's not the best way to live, because what if the United States stops dropping food on the floor for us? Then we're just kind of stuck there looking up.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll bite America's leg. To use a dog metaphor.
But there's a lot of internal things that need to be fixed first before anything even happens, right? I mean, as far as, I touched on it earlier, getting people to get off of welfare, or stop relying on government to take care of them, right?
Oh no, it's very true. I think and that's why I like the conversation around decolonization, because it allows
So broad.
and it allows for us to address a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
Because like the way that the social safety net in Guam is now, you have to wonder, is it the way that ancient Chamorros might set up, or Chamorros might set up a social safety net? I don't think so. I think they might do it a little different if somebody had asked them. If somebody had gotten, let's say in 1939, they got Pedro Martinez, Tomas Anderson Calvo, and all of these other guys into a room and think, well, how would we envision kind of a social safety net on the island? They might have come up with something different. But instead, we have this one that, it comes right from the United States, and it has its benefits, but it also has these drawbacks, right? And so that's why we're talking about models and looking at other countries, because the United States is the best at certain things, and almost everything that we have on Guam comes from the United States, their way of doing things. And you have to ask yourself, is that the best way? So, for example, it's an election this time of, this year is an election. People complain about government corruption and so on. And you can look at candidates as being corrupt. You can look at systems as being corrupt. Part of it is if you don't like the way the system works, well, the United States style of democracy is the one where the people have very little power, because you vote on a regular basis, and then you can't really do much to politicians.
It's more so in the United States than here, I think.
Well, it's a representative democracy. So your main power as a citizen is that you vote for somebody, and you don't really get to participate.
Yeah,
in
but think about the 2016 election, right? I mean, look how much the government did change.
Oh no, but so I'm saying though that So I'm just saying though that part of it is it may be the system. Like if you want less corruption, well, the U.S. system is one where there's actually a lot of corruption because regular people don't have much control over what their politicians do. You just vote for them, and then later you have the chance to not vote for them, but you can't really do much in between.
I see.
And then you look at these other systems, and it's kind of like, well, we have a particular style of healthcare, a particular style of education.
Do you have any example of sort of a system that's different in the aspect of the United States?
So, for example, let's say that you were to, well, there's actually lots. So
yeah, I guess
if you were to,
I guess one that's existing today.
Okay,
that a nation is currently running off of.
Well, so there's a particular school in Bali which I think might work. There's a Bali Green School, but so some of them focus more on. So if you look at like the way it is in Scandinavia, for example, they go to school for far less, but the students perform much better than American students. There is far less emphasis on testing. So the U.S. system is notorious for standardized testing.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing is, and so there's less emphasis on creativity, on your development sort of as a person in the world, your understanding of the world. And much of it is just because in the United States, your performance on tests is tied usually to your funding, right? So you got to take these tests to get this style of funding. And even in a state, if you perform low, then you'll get less funding and so on. And most countries don't operate like that because they recognize that tests are not the best way to prepare you for life, right?
Yeah. I heard someone say, once you teach a student to memorize something, they've stopped learning.
No, it's a very profound and true point.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I see it at the University of Guam. You get students who come through a system, 12 years of a system, and they don't want to learn. They just want to do enough to get through the class. And you understand that when you're in, K to 12, right? But then once you're in college, you don't have to, if you're still in that mold, you're wasting your time.
Right.
But most of the students that I have, I hate to say it, are like that. They just want to do the bare minimum. But the thing is, you're paying to be here, or you're borrowing money to be here. Like, you're wasting your time if you're trying to do the bare minimum.
Right.
But
stop doing it because someone else told you to do it. If you don't want to do it, then why do it, right?
Yeah. But so, and then even just thinking about the facilities. So, for example, in some societies, the textbook and the learning happens in the environment as opposed to in textbooks. And so, if we look at, for example, the Bali Green School or some of the charter schools that they have in Hawaii, you teach science outside of the classroom.
Yeah, I think there's a school in Japan also. They have classrooms outside.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's when you think about it. I mean, how much could I hate to say it? My children would hate it because they love aircon and I love aircon. But
damn, I'm sweaty. We just got out here. Can we go inside?
But how much money would we save if we didn't have to build all these massive air conditioned structures?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, part of it is that the style of education, you know, it's more like a prison, really. It's not, and so revamp it, redo it. There's nothing that says that we got to do this. The only reason that we stay in it is because we've got teachers and administrators who are trained in the American system, and then we've got ties to the federal government for funding.
Right, and it's an old system that's never evolved.
Yeah.
Right.
And
it came from the industrial age and taught people how to work and obey rules and lines and be in the assembly line and stuff like that.
Very good.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. And so we are of a size where we could revamp it.
Mm-hmm.
We could basically look and say, you know what, we've learned a lot from our connection to the United States. We appreciate it, but you know, in Singapore they have a really nice model that we should really try to focus on, or even Japan. If you look at the way, and it's funny because, you know, like every fifth person that I'm a friend with on Facebook has shared something about how in Japan students cook their own meals in the cafeteria.
I think they're the janitors at school.
Janitors and stuff like that. So the thing is, if you think about it, if Chamorros like 70 years ago wanted to create their own school system, they would have kids do that.
Right.
Why don't we do something like that? Well, because we're from a completely different system. Right?
Then you call it child labor.
Well, but it's just because we've got American laws on child. I'm just kidding. But if you think about it, if you really asked people, what should the school be that matches your values, that matches your interests, this place, it would look very different. And so whenever somebody shares one of those memes or one of those videos, I always tell them, why don't we reimagine our school system like that? Because if you think about it, that's more in line with the culture here and what people would really like their kids to be like, than what we actually raise. You wonder, well, why is it that children are more aguguat, they're even more crazier than they ever were? Well, I don't know. I mean, when you see kids freaking out in school, it's like prison riots, because kind of they're in a intellectual sort of prison for most of their life.
And I think the influence too, right? So a lot of Asian influence possibly back in the day with people from Asian countries intermingling with Chamorros and sort of those practices and ideals sort of instilled through the generations and evolved in that sense. I mean, we take off our shoes before we come in the house, right? That's such an Asian practice.
Yeah, similar connections of respect and the centrality of respect and sort of your learning those values, right? Because, you know, when you think about it, the Western system is a lot more about obedience in the abstract. You learn to be obedient to authority in the abstract, but you don't necessarily sort of learn to be a productive part of a community. And so because, you know, you sit, you do your work, you turn it in, you take your tests, you go home, and if you do everything right, then you're a good cog in the system, and one day you're released to become a big cog in the real system.
Right.
But
or you can make your own system if you're a big enough cog.
But if you think about it, if we had one where students actually were part of building their school and making their school function, it teaches you that yes, you do respect authority, that's good, but that sort of your education is what you make of it.
Empowering, right?
Yeah, empowering, even if they hate it. I mean, because I'm sure those kids in Japan are like, cocksucker motherfucker. Can't believe I gotta fucking do all this shit. I gotta sweep up this shit, man.
Isn't there an older guy that can do this?
I've heard that in the U.S. they don't gotta do this. Damn, I'm gonna go there someday. But
I want to go to a U.S. school. That's where I want to visit. I don't want to go to Disneyland. Let's go to U.S. school. I want to see someone else clean up the fucking bathroom.
But that's the thing. You gotta. And that's why I love this conversation, the decolonization conversation, because if there's problems, you can kind of just rearrange the pieces, or you can kind of repaint the walls, or you can think, maybe this isn't working. Why don't we try something different? But it's hard to get there unless you bring in the decolonization component that, you know what, this is how we got to this point, and we can recognize that it's helped us. We've gotten this far with it, but maybe we need to go a different direction now. Maybe we need to try something new, because given the way that people complain about like the school system on Guam, I would hope that people would be in favor of a radical restructuring. And I think it could be possible.
Man, I'm all for charter schools. The way charter schools are going about things, man, it's different. It's allowing people or kids to be more production based than sticking their heads in books from 1993.
No, it's very true. Very true. Because a charter school has a greater freedom and flexibility in that regard to kind of try out a model that you can't fit into sort of the larger.
It's sort of like a scaled society, right?
But yeah,
smaller scale. Yeah, much, and with kids.
Oh, but yeah, that's great conversation.
Yeah, for sure. You still have time to talk, or you? I don't want to hold you.
No.
Honestly, I had Arlene Steffi on the podcast, and we talked for 4 hours, and I was like,
oh, I can imagine that. Yes, I can imagine that.
Yeah, and I think Matt had to stand up 3 times during that podcast just to stretch his legs, get the blood flowing. Couple cups of coffee. Nah, it was good. Yeah. I don't. I think it's very important. Well, first I want to say I don't want to hold you, back from anything you got to do, but I think it's very important and healthy to have these kind of conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
Me personally, I don't know what's best. Because I don't even know what the next step is, right? And so that's why I like kind of sent that barrage of questions of like, okay, what are the baby steps, right? What does the next 5 years look like? How did the last 2 years look like for us, right?
No, you're absolutely right, and it's very normal to not know what's next, because we haven't really been in that position for a while to think about it, and so it's good to. That's why when people, so I love it when people ask questions, because actually when people will ask you 2 types of questions. They will ask you questions to shut you down, and they, like troll questions, like, oh, what are you going to do without this? Stuff like that. But you want to push back past that, because if they're asking that question in sincerity, then it's good. They want to know more. They want to learn. And
they just don't know how to approach it, right?
Maybe
they're just like,
maybe they need definitions of the terms, they need history, maybe they just want to know more, and so that's great.
Or they're just aggressive conversationalists.
Yeah. Questions are awesome.
Yeah.
But if the first steps, and so and I say this especially to those who are running for political office, who are running for governor, lieutenant governor, and senator. They're the ones that have the power to kind of make the first steps. So number 1 overall is to think about a real educational campaign on this issue. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever people decide, but a real education. And that means then that you set a date. And one of the reasons why we can't do that yet is because of the Davis case. But you set a date, and then the government, puts its weight behind it, and then the community responds. And you basically, for however long that educational process lasts, you get it out there until people are sick of hearing about it.
Whether you're hearing it on TV or
Exactly.
megaphone or
Exactly. Or whether you've got trucks driving by with, have you thought about free association today? And so, but do that to get that process started.
Right,
and
right.
then, but at the same time, think and act in a more independent way. Because even if you want to become a state, see, this is one thing that people don't understand, is that the strongest argument you could ever have to become a state is actually if you were more self-sufficient and less dependent upon the United States. Because if you go to the U.S. Congress and say we want to become a state, and they look and say, well, you get this much money from us every year, you could never survive on your own. You're too dependent. Because that's what they've said to territories in the past. And so you got to actually be more independent in order for them to see you as being equal to them and accept you as one of their own. And so think more independently and start taking those steps to kind of get us to define ourselves politically. So, one thing is break away from the U.S. federal tax code, de-link, so that way we can kind of set our own tax structure here. So the next time there's a Trump tax cut or something like that, it doesn't hit us by surprise and suddenly we're out. Tens of millions of dollars. And so, and start to seriously, and I have to give credit to Governor Calvo because he has been more serious than his predecessors, start trying to connect to the CNMI and start reunifying. And I believe Senator Will Castro too, he got the driver's license sort of recognition passed and so on. Take these programs that will integrate us. Now, and this is what I was talking about before, where you have this strategy of disobedience, where just because you don't have the right to do it or the U.S. says you can't do it, try it. Because you live in a gray area. You live in a gray area where you can do it, and they may never tell you you can't do it.
Right.
And so whoever is the next governor, be empowered. Try to make a deal with another country. Because right now, the main deals that we make are we sign like sister city agreements with other countries in order to establish ties.
Could it be as easy as Palau?
To make a deal with Palau? Or you could try that off. You could try that sort of as a start. But yeah,
or are you looking more of a bigger economic power?
Start any way you can, but push yourself out there. I'll give another example that Joe Atta once said. So Joe Atta said that when they were starting to negotiate for Commonwealth, he was the governor at the time, they would write the federal officials and they would say, we will start our negotiations on this date. And so at first, whenever they would put the word negotiations in any of their correspondence, the feds would say, we are not negotiating with you. You are a territory. The United States government doesn't negotiate with territories. We're having conversations. And so eventually, though, what Joe Atta and his staff did is they started to sneak the word negotiation into the documents. And so
it said negotiation every first
letter of the so it would come out where maybe it would say conversation, and then they would refer to it as negotiation here or there, and they would use the word everywhere they could. And after several years, the federal government was saying negotiations, and they were using the term negotiations. And it was a great way of shifting it because it's a gray area. You could argue that federal government can't negotiate with a territory. Of course they can. Of course they can. They just don't want to say that they can. And so they were able to politely and quietly push the issue. And eventually, by the end of it, you had the federal government and you had the Congress saying that the federal government is negotiating with the territory of Guam. And it's one way of elevating your status. So before, it was basically like, you can say what you want and we will give you whatever we want. But by the end of it, it was kind of like, can we make these changes? Can we come to an agreement on this? And so it started off very imbalanced, but then towards the end, finally, they were closer. Now, it didn't solve all the problems, of course, but it's one of those ways you push. You basically push. If it's a gray area, if you kind of live in the gray, if you live in sort of this vague territory, then those who are bold have the ability to define themselves and push the boundaries. You can stay in the gray area, you can stay there and you'll kind of be safe, but because it's not really defined, if you push, you can actually redefine things around you. You could get things that you didn't think were possible before because your own definition is actually, it's abstract. It can be changed. And so whoever's leading the island, think about those ways of pushing it, to start thinking and acting in a self-governed manner, in an independent manner.
I see what you're saying.
And so, thinking about, so people always say we can't become independent because we can't, we got to import things. That's what independent countries import things all the time.
Right.
But a smarter thing would be to basically slowly strategize means for reducing our import dependency. Because every country struggles with that. You don't want to be importing everything. It makes you too dependent on others. And it really puts you at risk in terms of food security. So you come up with a plan to slowly reduce that, because as you're reducing it, you also have to be investing in yourself and your regional partners to be producing more to feed and sustain yourselves. And that's something you can start as a territory. And it can help lead into a political status change.
Sort of creating self-sustenance for yourself.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
In a way.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's I always thought that if we go about improving ourselves first and then going to the table like, hey, okay, look at what we're doing here. I mean, look at California, right? Texas. They're like on the verge of becoming their own countries. They're making more money than the federal government in itself, right? So and they're like, well, so we don't really need you guys, but so can we just become a country, or what's going on here, right? So they're like they're going a step further than or sort of like the same, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like the way a lot of people think about statehood, is because people sometimes think of statehood as just being whatever we are, we'll just become a state and everything will be better. They think about it through the dependency. They don't think about how actually no, statehood there would be a financial burden on becoming a state, just like there might be a financial burden if you become independent. Mm-hmm. Both of them would come with a definite shifting of the economic terrain and the financial terrain, absolutely. But people assume statehood would be easy because we're already American. We already feel so American. We'll just become extra American. We'll become like everyone else. But no, the fact of the matter is, to become a state, you have to basically be attractive to the United States, because the majority of the representatives got to approve you becoming part of the club. And they're not going to do it if you are basically saying, we want to become part of the club because you guys got great food and we want to keep freeloading off of what you guys got. Right. They're going to say, well, you don't need to be part of the club then. We don't need you to be. You can keep freeloading from outside the club. Why would we include you? You don't have any self-respect.
Right.
And so that's why, and so even for independence requires, and the thing is that when you think about it, it requires thinking about how you're going to clean your house, how you're going to improve your house, how you're going to fix things up. That's what I really like about it. Yeah. Is because for statehood, a lot of people think we'll just become a state and everything will stay the same, just get better. But when you're thinking about free association or independence, it requires you to really think about how we would have to change things.
Yeah, I have a few ideas. Small gains. Giving people incentive to start their own businesses by giving tax breaks to building owners so that rent ain't so high. Maybe, and more money will be coming in. I really believe that's what Aganya can become. Right.
Oh, very true. Very true. And that's why we have to get out of these economic models that people learned in schools, or people just kind of learned, in random ways, where it's all about sort of the outside coming in.
Yeah.
Outside investment is always going to play a role, but you have to have your own internal economic engine.
For sure. I brought this one up on a previous podcast. What was it? Turning the South into a preserve, and you put toll roads. You pay to go down south. If you live down there, of course, you get some sort of tax break on your thing or a discount on the fast pass or whatever it may be. The local rate, you know. And put it at Pago Bay Bridge right there. You pay the toll, right?
There you go. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point because look at the tourist market and how it's changing. Look at we've got a bunch of and I haven't read enough of the economic studies on South Korean tourists about what their profile is, but the sense that I get is it seems like they like to stay in Airbnbs, they like to rent cars, and they like to do things on their own.
Right.
And the thing is, it's going to require Guam's tourist industry to change if you want that market to be sustainable. It means you're going to have things outside of Tumon. It means that the sort of the GVB Tumon model, it's got to change.
It's got to go.
And you do that by sort of, investing in projects outside of Tumon, because these South Korean tourists seem to be far more mobile than the Japanese.
Yeah.
Dude,
even if it's just people paying $1 to go to Laddystone Park, put in $1. And someone told me this, one of my friends, he was talking about Guam possibly even having its own currency. I think Detroit has its own currency. There's a few places in the United States that have their own currency, and you sort of force tourists to use sort of a debit card in order to spend money on Guam. And that sort of tax to them by buying the card or recycling the card or exchanging the currency to, or their currency to, it'd still be a US dollar, but to this Guam debit sort of, and you can spend it at these places.
Yeah, there's lots of possibilities.
Yeah.
It's just we gotta figure out how to align them with our realities.
I see.
So that was always kind of one of the issues, is a lot of people are stuck in this idea that we couldn't have like a huge manufacturing industry, or we couldn't be exporting goods to the United States, and so therefore we'll never. But it's like, no, small islands have possibilities, and Guam, which is quite modern compared to the rest of the Pacific, is already very interconnected, technology-wise, transportation-wise, politically, with a lot of other places. If you were to maximize those advantages, Guam would definitely go far. I mean, other places of similar size and similar advantages are super rich nowadays. And so we've just kind of been left out from that, but we definitely could, but we don't want to copy the United States. The United States is a huge country.
Yeah. You ever heard of Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti?
Yeah.
So Djibouti, Camp Lemonnier, it's actually a lease space that the United States pays Djibouti, and I think it's like $16 billion a year. And that's rented space, right, for the next 10, 20 years.
It's I hate to say it, it's a better deal than what Guam gets now, because Guam now, what you get is the U.S. has these huge bases, almost 1/3 of the island, and you get the taxes from federal employees on the island, and then you get access to federal programs. And, it can add up to a lot, but the problem always is you never really know what way it's going to go. So you never really know where you're going to stand, because your participation in the federal programs, it's decided over there. It's not part of a contract. That's what I always have to impress upon people is, you may like those programs. You may think they're really great. If, I get students who are like, but I like having federal student loans. I'm like, yes, but you do realize that there are people in the U.S. Congress who would like it so that the territories can't get them. And you wouldn't have any say over that, because Guam doesn't pay federal taxes. And you're a territory. You don't have the right to participate in programs. You get the privilege to be included in them, and it's a huge difference. And so if you like these things, push for them to be real. Push to become a state so you're on equal footing. Or push to become independent, where you have to develop your own, and then your relationship to the United States is one as an ally, for example. And I would much rather be an ally of the United States than be a possession of the United States.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I was silent because I was nodding, and the word definitely wasn't coming out. I was like, oh yeah. How long have we been going here, Matt?
Hour 40.
Whew.
Oh yeah, I gotta head out.
Okay, Dr. Mike, thank you so much. I feel like we shouldn't wait almost 2 years to have this conversation again.
No, call me anytime.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy.
Yeah, I feel like this is very educational for me, and I'm sure it's going to be extremely educational for a lot of people who listen out in the States or listen here on Guam and sort of kind of get that understanding of what it is. Because the way the media sort of portrays you is sort of different than how you just portrayed yourself on this show, right?
No, that's true. And yeah, I do need to clarify. I was not rejected from Al Qaeda or ISIS. I know that I never applied. I had the application. I had my letters of recommendation, but I missed the deadline. I missed the deadline. And
So you have to wait next year.
they were my I didn't even apply to a safety terrorist group. But no, I mean, yeah, Sidus Masi for saying that. I just, for me, it's like I have my opinions on it, but I also want to know what people think about it. And if people are uncertain, that's fine. If people have questions, that's fantastic. If people want to talk through things, wonderful. Because if we look at the traditional way these things go in Micronesia, for example, Guam included, people sit, they chew pugwa, they drink some coconut, some coconut milk or something like that. You talk it out. You come to consensus. You work through things. And that's what we got to do around this too. And so
Agreed. Despite
I'm
your
always willing.
views. Yeah.
I'm always willing. And my kids can attest. They'll get dragged to meetings where I'm talking to some random person for an hour, and they're kind of like, that guy doesn't like you. Or they're like, we're like in Payless, and some guy comes up to me and is like, "You're so racist." And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that you think that. How am I racist? You're taking away my rights as a white person. I'm like, oh,
God.
no, I've had so many. I mean,
Well, you can't please everybody, right?
yeah.
I'm sure what I do on the show doesn't please everybody, but it's as long as we're able to express our opinions and able to talk about it, and yeah, why not?
No, I always appreciate your podcast. It's a great place.
Thank you.
Because you always bring in people that have great knowledge, great ideas, and strong community connections too. And that's what really makes the difference.
Cool. Yeah, let's cut this out. Put anything you want on. Promote anything that's going on. The podcast.
When will this come out?
This will most likely drop tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. And so before I go, I wanted to invite everybody. Independent Guahan has a concert coming up on July 4th at the Front Field at Adelup from 3 to 6 p.m. There'll be, let me think, who are the bands? Ben Lamlam Sinicolas, Masaya Hafa, Andrew Gumatautau. There'll be a couple of others. But it'll be a great chance. So if you liked this discussion, that will be the place to continue this discussion. There'll be great local music. Also, each political status task force will have tables out there with information. The Commission on Decolonization will have a table out there. But it'll be a great place to kind of talk to others who have questions, maybe some who have some answers. But we want to invite everybody to come out on July 4th, 3 to 6 p.m. Adelup.
Cool. How can people follow you in any way?
Oh, and so you can follow Independent Guahan on Instagram, on Facebook. And you can always email us at independentguahan@gmail.com.
Cool. Promote the podcast too, man.
Oh,
totally. Yeah.
I keep forgetting. And so Independent Guahan has a podcast. It is not as famous as the Master Band podcast. But or not as infamous as the Master Random podcast.
Not at all. I'm not even famous at all. Jeez.
It's called Fanatsu, and so you can download it on iTunes. But you can also follow it on Facebook. We've been collaborating with Julius Santos's podcast Expose
right.
To get into the political conversation this election year. And so, yeah, follow us on Facebook if you want to watch the live streams for all our podcasts coming up.
Cool. Great. Dr. Mike, thank you. Super fun, man. We'll do this very soon.
Oh, yeah. Anytime.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, Maddie loves you, Brian loves you, and most especially, I love you too. Goodbye. Good night. Have a nice day wherever you are. Peace out.